Hi folks, Matt Keevy here with the Longview School District Technology Department. I just wanted to take a quick couple of minutes here today with you to share a new feature that we've enabled for all secondary instructional staff inside of Zoom called Webinar Mode. Webinars are very similar in form and function to regular Zoom meetings, but they have some structural elements that'll help you better manage a hybrid learning environment when you have kids coming in via Zoom and you have students also in your classroom. Now, in order to schedule a Zoom webinar, you're going to do very similar things as you would when you're scheduling a regular Zoom meeting. You're going to want to log into your Zoom profile on Zoom's website. And instead of clicking on meetings, you'll find a new option just below that called webinars. We'll click on that now. When you click on webinars, you'll see a very similar dialogue to the scheduling dialog that you would see in regular meetings. You'll see a big blue button to schedule the webinar, and we'll click on that now. And it follows a very similar process. So we're going to give it a topic. You'll need to decide on a start time, the duration, whether or not you intend for the webinar to be a reoccurring webinar. This might prove valuable to you if you are accustomed to scheduling reoccurring meetings with your students. You'll want to make sure your host video is on. And you'll click schedule. Now, before I do that, I do want to cover two options that might be a point of interest for you as you venture into webinar mode. Under webinar options, you have Q&A and you have enable practice session. Now, Q&A is pretty similar to the standard chat dialogue in a Zoom meeting, but it's more structured to where an attendee coming in via Zoom would be able to send you a question, and then you would be able to respond to them either privately or more publicly to the audience, the rest of the audience coming in via Zoom. Enable practice session is a function that allows you to kind of set up the webinar, get everything in order on your screen where you want things, and then there will be a button, and I think it's an orange or yellow button that says, start broadcast. So you might play with that as you kind of start to work out the details of scheduling a webinar. So we'll go ahead and click schedule. And then before I start this webinar, I'm going to go ahead and send this invitation to my test student. Okay, and then I'm going to join the webinar with the test student. Okay, we're all prepped there. We'll go ahead and start the webinar. Okay. So now that we've started our webinar, we've had our student join the meeting, I want to show you a couple of similarities to a regular Zoom meeting. We still have all the same sharing options. We can share a digital whiteboard, we can share a web browser, other programs, we can share PDF files, different types of instructional content. We have the same advanced options, including the ability to pull in analog content from your document camera. And so you'll see that pretty much it's the same experience from a presentation standpoint as it is in a regular meeting. On our participants list, you'll see kind of two different options. We have panelists, and typically, unless you've assigned somebody a panelist, right, you'll only see yourself as the host. But if you did assign somebody as a panelist or promote somebody as a panelist during the meeting, they would show up here in the panelist list and they'd be able to do kind of the same things that you're able to do, share content, turn on their camera, that sort of thing. Now over here on the attendees dialog, you'll see the list of students that have joined the webinar. Now, this is going to be useful for attendance taking purposes. Essentially, what you're going to do is you're going to wait for your students to join the webinar, and they'll show up in the attendees list, at which point you'll be able to audit the attendees list against your class roster for those that are expected to be coming in remotely. We still have polls and we still have Q&A. Now, polls the same function as what you've been accustomed to using possibly in your regular Zoom meetings. You'll be able to ask questions, engage feedback from students remotely, and that might prove useful to you as we move into the hybrid learning environment. The Q&A dialogue is quite similar to the chat, but more structured. Now you've got open questions. If a student was to prompt you with a question, it would pop up here, and then you could opt to answer it privately, as I said before, or more publicly to the whole Zoom audience. That's about it when it comes to webinar. It's important to note that by default, the students coming in to a webinar, they won't have a camera enabling option, and they won't be able to turn on their microphone ad hoc. So that's going to minimize the potential for disruption, but there is the potential that they would have a legitimate interjection in your instruction that they wouldn't easily be able to do. So it's going to be, imperative that you build in some sort of mechanism to interact with your students remotely. If it's outside of Zoom, maybe possibly in Google Docs, or potentially you could leverage in a structured way, allowing the students coming in remotely to talk. And basically what that involves is when you hover over a student on the attendees list, you can click the Allow to Talk button, and they'll receive a prompt on their screen that says, the host would like you to unmute your microphone. And they'll be able to click unmute, and they'll then be able to interject into the instruction. Now, when they're done, you're going to disable talking, and that comes out on the more dialogue here. That's about it. In terms of scheduling a webinar, it's going to be a very similar process to scheduling a regular meeting. You're going to basically do all the same things that you normally would do. And when students join, you'll be able to take attendance from the attendees list instead of the participants list, but similar functionality there, auditing against your class roster and so forth. And really the only important last thing to impart is that you just want to make sure you're building in some bidirectional communication mechanism, whether that's structured time to allow students to talk inside the Zoom webinar with you, or some other mechanism outside of the Zoom session to stay connected with those students and ensure that they're getting that same quality experience as your students that are coming in person. That's it for me. I'm Matt Keevy with the Longview School District Technology Department. Thanks very much for your time and attention.